Welcome to the Folger Estate Stable. Just for a moment, step back with me in time, back to 1905, when this stable was built. Listen to the horses walking on the cobblestone. Hear them nicker and whinny. Smell their alfalfa-scented breath, the rich, earthy stink of manure. Feel the sleek coat of a horse's flank, the taut strength of its muscles. These animals, back in 1905, were critical to their owners. They were their trucks, tractors, their sedans and sports cars, and often their family pets. In California in the early 1900s, horse breeding was big business, and Woodside and its neighboring towns had some of the finest stables to house those well-bred horses. That was a time when wealthy San Franciscans built summer residences in the Mid-Peninsula to escape the city fog. Men like Stanford, Crocker, Schilling, who had made fortunes in railroads, mining, and trade, built mansions during what is called the Great Estates period.
Our great-grandfather was the first Folger to come to California, and it had a unique story in that he came here when he was 14 years old in 1850 from Nantucket, because there had been a great fire in Nantucket and the gold rush had started, and he came out with two older brothers. When he got off the boat in San Francisco, while many people went to the gold country at the age of 14, he was deemed not old enough to do that, and so he got a job with a man named William Beauvais, who was building a coffee mill. And that's how the Folger family got into the coffee business, while many other families in San Francisco were seeking their way in life with other interests. As it happened, Folger's Coffee had both coffee, tea, and spices, and eventually sold the spices to the Schilling family, which is one of the old San Francisco families. And our great-grandfather had a unfortunately short life, but it was his son, the second James Athern Folger, who bought the property in Woodside and built the that the family enjoyed until the 1950s in Woodside.
In 1902, coffee magnate James Folger commissioned the famous architect Arthur Brown Jr. to build such an estate. But first, he erected the stable, the Folger Estate Stable. In those days, horses were the backbone of labor and travel, so a stable was a must for a project like the Folger Estate. It was needed too for the family's purebred pleasure horses, for racing, carriage driving, riding to the hounds, keeping up with the neighbors.
They would hitch a horse up to one of the smaller gigs, and we would ride along with them along Woodside Road and down Trip Road.
Horses were the name of the game. Woodside was unique in that it was a long ways from the railroad. From the railroad station up to these large estates, it was dependent upon horse-drawn vehicles. The kids maybe even rode on ponies.
The Folger Estate Stable was built using redwood from the property itself. James Folger had created a sawmill on the site, powered by the waters of nearby Alembeek Creek. The architectural style of the stable is described as French Baroque, with details of the arts and crafts movement. It has a wood frame, originally held together by square nails, on a foundation of concrete footings. The main adornment is found in the arched portico, the corbels under the eaves, the paneled soffits, and the balcony on the side. It was built with a hip roof that contained dormers, chimneys, ventilating towers, and skylights. Very clever designs that brought in extra light and fresh air. The side wing of the building may have been an area for the blacksmith, an important fellow in those days.
I think one of my biggest pleasures, my sister and my brother, was to go in and the blacksmith would make rings for us out of the horse nails, wrap them around, the anvil, shape them, and then we'd have these rings to wear, which were very special, as you can imagine.
There were originally more than a dozen stalls, a carriage room, tack rooms, living quarters, and a hayloft above. To feed the horses, flakes of hay were dropped through the neatly crafted semicircular hay drops above each stall.
I have a lot of fond memories of being around this building in my childhood. I would ride the horses down from the house up above most summer days and ride down by the barn and see everybody grooming their horses and the farriers, and then I'd keep on going and go down to the arena down below where I would ride and a lot of my father's cow ponies and quote-unquote teach them how to jump. So it was a lot of fun. That was one of my fondest memories.
My family came to the Folger Estate back in 1920 when I was just a little toddler. And my father had the job. He was a caretaker for the whole 1,700 acres, not just the barn here. My earliest memories were, I guess, playing up here in the barn. Oh, we climbed up the stairs and up in the rafters, jumped in the hay.
At the stable, hay was loaded into the second story from the bank behind the barn, which is why Folger Stable is referred to as a bank barn. And that brings us to the stone walls. These lovely moss-covered stone walls were built stone by Chinese laborers brought in by the former landowner. They are dry stack walls. That is, they have no mortar to hold them together. And yet they were so carefully designed and balanced that they have endured through rainstorm and earthquake for well over a century. The previous owner had called this property Mountain Home Ranch and had raised grapes on the land, not for wine, but for raisins, which he then exported to China. A remnant of that enterprise was unearthed during the renovation. Small gauge railroad tracks, probably used for carts full of grapes.
In the carriage area, during excavation about a foot below the existing floor slab, we found a railroad track system, a small gauge railroad track that had probably been used for carts and agricultural purposes. We also found straw in the ceiling between the rooms and the hayloft above, which was installed for insulation. Also, part of the display in the exhibit hall is the original electrical panel, which was relocated, and it shows the exposed copper mounted on marble, and we've installed it so you can see both sides, the front and the back. We've also retained a section of knob and tube wiring, which was the normal way to wire a building at that time, in the early 1900s.
The redwood forests behind the Folger estate eventually grew back from the logging of the 1800s.
To climb up through the creeks that crossed under Woodside Road would go up to the Folger property, and we would look for Indian heads, which we often found, and it was very exciting when we all came back with an Indian head. We saw a lot of mountain lions all the time when you were riding, especially up in the redwoods above the Folger, when you started to go up near the skyline.
There was plenty of life in these hills before the stable was built. The Folger Stable sits where Native American Ohlone Indians once lived, where, in the 1800s, Mexican ranchos spread out for thousands of acres with herds of longhorn cattle, where Yankee settlers from San Francisco and the East Coast moved in to reap the lumber riches of the Sierra Redwoods, and where, in 1902, James Folger purchased the land for his family estate.
There's that whole area of some decades of some probably beautiful stables there that have long since burned down or been torn down. And we're fortunate to have the Folger Stable.
Let's fast forward to today. While the Folger Mansion is in private hands, the Folger Stable sits on 900 acres of land that belongs to the public. Back in 1974, Martin Wunderlich generously donated this land to the county to be used as a park. It included the carriage house, the dairy house, the blacksmith's barn, the old stone walls, and, of course, the main stable. Here, public horse boarding continues the long tradition of horses in Woodside. Here, too, thanks to the efforts of local volunteers, the County of San Mateo, and the generosity of hundreds of residents, the Folger Stable has been brought back from the brink of decay to house horses and serve as a showplace for restored carriages, old farm implements, and other reminders of our past.
What was fun about working on the Folger project, especially at my stage of my career, was that it was like having a delicious dessert. It's rare that you get a chance to work on such a magnificent building as the Folger building. I feel that the craftsmen on this restoration project, particularly the carpenters, were every bit as skilled as the early day craftsmen that worked on this building.
The Folger Stable has been a silent witness to the many changes of the past 100 years. From the entrepreneurs who made fortunes during the gold rush in the 1800s to today's tech titans of Silicon Valley. Now it opens its doors to you, to witness the past merging with the present, bound together by horses and their Folger Stable.